So we are up to a very dramatic moment in Jewish history, the encounter of the second generation of patriarchs and matriarchs. And we do not know anything about the meeting of Abraham and Sarah, and yet we know a lot about what happens when it comes to the meeting of other famous Jewish people, let's say. And so often it transpires near a well. That's what happens with Yaakov. It happens with Moshe Rabbeinu as two very famous examples in the Torah. And here in our parsha that we've been studying in Chayei Sarah, at the end of this chapter that we're in here, we learned that in point of fact, there's also a well in the story. Pasuk Samach Bet, verse 62, Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i v'ho yoshev be'eretz hanegev. Yitzchak seems to be coming from a well. Now, depending which tradition you want to seize upon, he is variously coming from an area where there are some kind of business interests in the vicinity of Be'er Sheva, or he is, according to Rashi, he picks up the idea, which was described to me by one of my rebbeim as the biblical law of conservation of character, is that the Torah will, if it's not clear who someone is, if it'll close a gap by resetting the name of the person and associating with someone that came before, that works. I'm not suggesting that's not what's going on. I'm just saying it is uncanny how many times that does happen in the context of the the narration of the Torah. In other words, so we know already coming up shortly, we will learn about Keturah, and Chazal tell us Keturah is Hagar, according to one opinion. We'll understand that a little bit deeper, but the notion that now that Sarah Imeinu has passed away, Yitzchak is worried about his father and his father's happiness, and he goes to figure out how he could bring back Hagar. Is just a fascinating layer of understanding. And when Yitzchak arrives, though, also coming from a wellspring, a place of growth, of sustenance, maybe of fertility, symbolically, and the like. And of course, Rivka Imeinu is very much associated with a well, the well that Eliezer finds her at. And now Yitzchak Avinu also coming from a well. What's interesting, of course, not the same well, they're not in the same location. And the fact that they're not is a reality of geography, but another level, I think there is a symbolic representation in a way that they had two separate wells. And what I mean by that is Rivka Imeinu, we already met her family according to the Midrashim, not the Pshat, but the Midrashim. The level of ambivalence and moral ambiguity of her father and her brother, even of her mother, is such that we're never sure, first of all, is her brother interested in meeting the Eved Avraham, or is he interested in figuring out where the payout is? And it seems the family has some interest in that. But on the level of Medrash, remember we learned previously that Rivka's father wants to take all of the goodies for himself and tries to poison the Eved Avram, and he dies. Again, to that reading, what's happening is she comes from that well where the water, let's say, is turgid. There's something that's impure there, as opposed to Yitzchak Avinu, who heralds from the home of Avraham and Sarah, a refined home, a home of chesed, etc. And of course, you could say, well, there was chesed in the house of Rivka as well. Look, they took in the Eved and all of its entourage. True. But is there some, how could I say it, murkiness in the water, there's something opaque about this family that Rivka Imeinu heralds from, which will, of course, raise her as a very great tzaddiket later on, just to sort of shoot ahead, but to sort of have it in mind. Along this midrashic channel, Chazal will describe that when the Torah says in Parshat Toldot, it's next parsha after Chayei Sarah, that Yitzchak and Rivka were not successful initially at having children, that Rivka Imeinu, Lo Aleinu, was unable to have children for 20 years, and 20 years of prayer, etc. The Torah, the Midrashim and Chazal go out of their way to mention that the prayer of a tzaddik ben Rasha is not the same thing as the prayer of a tzaddik ben tzaddik. And the prayer of a tzaddik ben tzaddik is somehow more refined. Now, why should that be true? We'll have to wait for Parsha Toldot, but Chazal are cognizant of the idea that these two people heralded from separate wells, if you will. They were drawn from separate wells. And the Be'er Lachai Ro'i itself seems to be along those lines. Again, according to some of the Parshanei Mikra, he simply went to be there for business. So maybe he was living in that area. And maybe it's possible the Ramban allows Vitachin Bavur Hayot Mavo Makor Shahaya Yaakov Holech Tamid Al Makom Ahu. It was a source place, a place that Yitzchak would always go to in order to pray. And ki hulo makom tefila bavur harot sham malach, because once there was a malach who had arrived there, who had appeared in that spot, and therefore it was a place that had sort of an impression of being a sacred place. He lived in that vicinity. When you read the Ramban, I think it's much less clear that the story is about Yitzchak trying to pair up his father with Hagar, and much more about his own spiritual engagement. He wants to talk to Hashem. So where does he go to shul? There are no shuls to go to. So where does he go? He goes out to be in that location. Give me one more minute and I'll turn over some questions and comments. But the idea that he was going to this location on a regular basis, it wasn't out of character. For Rashi, it was a one-time thing. He was on a quest to help his father be happy. Radak, by the way, points out also along the lines of the Parshanim that he didn't live there. He lived in Hebron with his father, but it's also in the area south of Yerushalayim, the Negev area. So he decides he's going to go to an area where he has either sheep that are grazing or he has some kind of other business going on there, and that's the place. So he would go and he would stay there, sort of encamp there. So that day he happened to be coming back, and he was going to go back to a place where he used to sleep over. That's somewhere between Be'er Lachari, where the business venture was, and Hebron. Where exactly? Somewhere on the way. And Eliezer is coming down and ends up coming farther south than Hebron, looking for his master's son in order to pair them up as the story goes. Okay, Shelley had a comment, and then we'll see if anybody else. Shelley, go ahead, please, or question.
Yes. Okay. You started out by saying that there's always a connect. There often is a connection between one part and another, and this that they're alluding to. Okay. So could they also be alluding to something in the future? Because with the two wells, and one being pure and one being murky, Rivka, we all know at the end what's going to happen, and she's going to exhibit some very love-unlike behavior. Also, there's the idea that this parsha starts out with the death of Sora. We may not know how Avraham and Sora met, and we may know about this business about Yitzchak and Rivka, but we aren't going to know anything. We know all about Sora's death, and we're not going to find out anything about Rivka's death. She's going to fade away like this is not
fade away.
Yes, this is not going to be not going to be good. So is that a foreshadowing?
I don't know the foreshadow. I'm foreshadowing. And I'm suggesting that the Torah is telling us something about someone coming from a well in order to indicate, unlike other people who met at the well and they were all together, etc. Here, the idea of the well, there are two different wells. And as we will see, I guess I am foreshadowing. I think it's actually what the pshat is hinting at. There's something about what's going on in their relationship already from the outset. And as you're pointing out, correct, what's going to happen with Rivka Imenu? You use the expression love and like behavior. We could debate, and the Chazal do debate, and the Mefarshim do debate, whether she was turning that negative trait towards positive ends, or whether she was somehow playing out some of the issues from her family, where things are not straight and not lavan. They're not chalak. They're not mechuver kasimla, as the halachic terminology goes. There's something about them that doesn't quite match up, right? And that's going to lead us also to the question of, they're the two children that will go their different ways. And of course, exactly as you say, for Sarah Iman, I could answer you very simply and say, well, we don't know much about the death of Rivka. We know a lot about Rachel's death because it's a famous death. We know nothing about Leah's death. We hear nothing about what happens to whoever, Yocheved, Tzipora. There are other great Jewish women. We just don't hear what happens to them either. So maybe Rivka, why? Nothing, you could say on the level of Pshat, nothing special or momentous was happening aside from her passing. Chazal didn't see it that way. They see it much more the way you're pointing out, like she fades away. Why didn't it mention anything about that? How,
Devorah, the nursemaid's death.
Yeah, she gets mentioned. So that the fact that she gets mentioned and everybody says she doesn't have a single line of dialogue in the whole story. She accompanies Rivka Imenu at the beginning, and we find out she died. So Chazal says it's a euphemistic way of saying that Rivka died. Why don't you just say Rivka died? The governess died. So with that we have to get to. We're not told it yet. So hold those thoughts, and God willing, see, I'm keeping us together, all of us learning together. I'm hooking you in. I hope you come back. Oh, when you get to it, by Yishlach, it's a long time from now. So we'll have to understand that a little bit better. But just to point out the thing with the wells, of course, and my child comes home with their picture, and the 4 years old, 5 years old. So it's obvious the Be'er Lacharoi is Hagar and Keturah is the same person. And it's just, it's beautiful. And by the by, according to that midrashic line, it's mentioned as far as Chazal is concerned, it's in our Torah Sheval Peh. Don't think that Hagar being chased out of the house was something Avram Avinu wanted to do, but out of deference and respect to Sarah, and the fact that Hashem told him, Kol asher tumalach Sarah shema b'kolah, he listened, he hearkened, he heeded his wife's words, he did what she asked. But, ages and ages hence, he wasn't finished with Hagar. Again, on the level of Pshat, you say, well, the Pshat dialogue with the Medrash is, then why didn't it just say Hagar's name? And the answer could be out of deference to Sarah. She has another name. Other people have different transformed names. So she also has a transformed name. She's no longer called Hagar. Again, you can see it two ways, and neither one way, in my view, is more legitimate or authoritative in this case. Sometimes Midrash Chazal do have more a feel of being authoritative. I'm not sure that this is one of them. Out comes Yitzchak. Yitzchak l'suach basadeh lifnot arev, v'yisainav, v'yar v'hinei gmalim ba'im. I'm skipping that pasuk other than on the most surface levels. We're going to dive back into it in 2 minutes, or more than 2 minutes. But Yitzchak goes out to converse in the field as the evening is coming. Lifnot arev. I'll come back to this pasuk. He lifts up his eyes, v'yar v'hinei gmalim ba'im, and he sees the camels are coming. And what happens immediately? Now she looks up and she sees him. She saw Yitzchak and she fell off the camel. Rashi, she saw Yitzchak, she saw how majestic he looked, and she was so surprised. V'tohemi panav, she was astonished at his face. Vatipol hishmita atzma la'aretz. She dropped herself to the ground, and she went off of the camel. In other words, to greet him in some way, but also out of a mark of deference. I'll skip right to the Hemek Davar, the words of the Netziv, which some thought was a little bit too I don't know what the word is, too charif, too progressive. But the Netziv of Volozhin explains on this pasuk that Rivka v'teret Yitzchak be'odo umedu mitpalel. It's the whole midrashic line we'll come back to. He was David v'ya kimal az kimal ach Elokim nora me'od. He looked like an angel of God. He was very awesome. Kimavur baraba. And then we learn Zerata yadav shtuchot betfila came niv'ata me'od. She saw his hands were stretched out, extended in prayer. She was very afraid. Vatipol me'al hagamal. Meirov pachad ve'ema. She was very much afraid, and omnam lo yadam mihi mitpachedet. She didn't even realize who she was afraid of, as it were. This opens the door to the basic idea of the Netziv. He basically thinks that this moment of fear, I'm using the language, he didn't use the language of trauma, but it was setting the path for everything that would, and the pattern for everything that would come later in the relationship. Let me read you the words. Further along, he writes this. It then describes, I'm sorry, I should do the next pasuk also, excuse me. We skipped, I went too quickly. Samachay 65. Who is that man over there who is coming in the field to greet us? Vayomer ha'eved, hu adoni, that's my master. She took the kerchief, or the you could say the veil, but it's really the scarf, and she covered herself with it, right? So she was very impressed by this. Out of fear, out of shame, she understood, says the Netziv, that she felt she was not worthy of being his wife. Umeaz v'hala, and from then onward, nikba b'liba pachad mimenu. Instilled in her heart from that moment forward was fear in her heart. She was not with Yitzchak as Sarah was with Avraham. V'Rachel im Yaakov, and how Rachel was with Yaakov. Asher b'yot lahem ezek kepeda aleihem. If they had any kind of an issue, you could maybe even say a quarrel or a squabble, or shinui deya, or they didn't agree about something. Lo boshu ledaber retat lifnehem. They did not shirk from speaking their mind. They just called it as they saw it. We see that with Sarah Imenu. What did she tell Avinu? Twice. Get rid of Hagar. Second time, get rid of Hagar and her son. Rachel, remember? Havali banim, ayin meita anochi. I want children, otherwise I should die. You know, remember? And what does he say back? I'm not God. I can't do that for you. Remember? So you see that, and with Rivka and Yitzchak, Masha'en Kain Rivka. Doesn't happen. All of this, Hakdama la Sipur Shiavova Parsha Toldot. Everything you're reading now is the introduction, setting the stage for what's going to be in Parshat Toldot. Shayu Yitzchak Rivka Mechulakim B'Deyot. Yitzchak and Rivka did not agree about what to do with their children, how to raise their children. Umikol makom lo matzah Rivka leiv lahamid et Yitzchak al da'ata b'dvar mechochim. And in any case, Rivka did not have the heart to present to Yitzchak her view with direct words. Ki hi yodata emet ki esav rak tzai b'fiv. She knew the truth, says the Netziv, that Esav was just a man with the hunt in his mouth. It's a double entendre. It's a double entendre, say in English. French is double entendre. He has the hunt in his mouth, means he's familiar with it. He knows how to hunt, i.e. as a hunter of animals. But the hunt is in his mouth means his mouth operates like a hunter, the way he speaks, duplicity, etc. V'chein b'shar habrachot. So it was the time of the brachot. V'chol zeh, all of this, hayasi ba me'akadosh baruch hu sheyagiu habrachot liYaakov davke ba'ot ha'of. And all this was caused from Hashem, that the brachot should come to Yaakov, says the Netziv, specifically in this manner. Because will be explained when I get to Parshat Toldot why it had to be this way and why God wanted it to be this way. What the Netziv, Yehuda Berlin, what he thinks is the reason, but he says it had to be. Had to be. Ve'elu haita Rivka im isha kemosav rachim anashehen. Had Rivka been with her husband as Sarah and Rachel were with their husbands, lo haya magia b'zeh ofen. It wouldn't have come about in this way. Ve'akol b'ashgacha pratit merosh shetagia Rivka liYitzchak b'shash tibahel mimenu. All of this was through divine ordination, i.e., through a hashgacha Pratit means a divine providence on a very personalized and mysterious level from the outset, that Rivka should arrive and encounter Yitzchak at the exact moment such that their encounter that would lay the tracks, lay the ground for everything that would come afterward. She would be afraid of him. The end of the matter would follow and flow according to God's will. I mean, this is just really, really shocking. I hope you agree. I've read it many times. Every time I go back to it, I say, seriously? Because you could have argued, I could have argued, wait, I know that Hashem's running the world, but Hashem's running like setting up the parameters for how the patterns in the relationship between the husband and the wife are going to be. Zeme Hashem? It was my free will. Where I decide, right? Chazal teaches a Kobi de Shemaim chutz mirat Shemaim in the hands of heaven, except for the fear of heaven, and that means all moral decisions. But perhaps, at least the way the Netziv is, it was one of the more controversial things that the Netziv said, is that he was willing to go into the marital relationships of the Avot and Imahot and speak about the way that there were certain initial foundation stories in their own relationships that then would follow them with echoes to what would transpire later, right? Shelley had asked in the chat here, why does Rivka fall off the camel before she knows it's Yitzchak? So the way that most of the commentators reckon with this is that she doesn't know it's Yitzchak. She just sees a man who looks angelic, and that is an awesome sight. She falls off the camel or jumps off the camel, whichever one it is, and then turns to the Eved and says, is that him? Yes, that's him. You know, who is this man who's coming to greet us? Is it him? That's the implication. Yes, it's him. Yeah. Note also, what's his name? Verse Pasuk 65. V'tomer la'eved, mi ha'ish halazeh ha'olech basadeh likratenu. Who is the ish that is there, that is going in the field, that is coming to greet us? What does the Eved say? This is my master. Why is she calling him an ish? Why don't you just say, is that Yitzchak? She knew his name, I think, maybe. Why do you think his name isn't being used here? He's being called the Ish. And how does it bear out what I just mentioned before about the Parshani Mikra, about what it meant that she was so impressed when she saw Yitzchak? What do you think? Any hands? Shelley, go, please.
Ish means important man. This may be the time when power transfers from Avraham to Yitzchak, because the servant's master is Avraham. When the servant is in Haran, and every time he's talking about his master, it's Avraham. It's not Yitzchak. So this is the moment of transfer.
Excellent. That's a good possibility. Any other layers about what Ish sometimes represents in the Torah? Talked about it previously about the Eved Avraham at the well and the oscillation between him being an Eved and being an Ish and then an Eved again. Think about another Ish that comes up later on in the
Malach?
Yeah.
Malachim? She thinks he's a Malach?
Well, I don't know if he's actually a Malach, but there's something angelic or other, I would say it differently, otherworldly about him. And that's part of what the fear is. She's awestruck. She's not even sure what is moving her so much, but she sees this person who's on such a high spiritual level. You could say he had an encounter in his life with Shemaim and Aretz, and maybe in a certain way he never came back down. Now, I don't mean that literally. He's a human being, right? He lived, he was born, he lived, he died. But did he have some kesher to Shemayim that most human beings did not? We know for sure he did. And that also colors further along in Rivka Imenu's case, the well is attached to the ground. The well that she comes from, where she does kindness, she draws it out of the low places. Very beautiful. All we know about Yitzchak and the well over here is the Be'er L'Chai Ro'i. It's the place where Shemaim and Aretz had an encounter at the place of a well. A Malach spoke, etc. Now he comes from there, and you could say he's bathed in spiritual light, and she sees him. Yeah, Helen, you had a comment? I think I heard the squawk of the phone. Go ahead.
Joseph, on his way to his brothers, sees.
Oh, perfect.
And we claim that to a malach.
Excellent.
But wait, I got something else. Ezer Kenegdo, that concept was very quickly broken by Chava. So even though that's a way of man and wife interacting was broken immediately. So how all these relationships fit into Ezer Kenegdo, it's a free-for-all.
Choliot.
That
Choliot.
every woman has her own interpretation.
Yeah, but each one is different. Each one is different. Each one is right. And the expression takes two to tango. So the point here is not to say that it's all on Rivka. The point is there's something about their dynamic of their interaction and the way in which they met, according to the Netziv at least, that set up the paradigm from which everything else would flow. There was more of a sense of reverence for Yitzchak in their household than there was in the house of Avraham and Yaakov. Not because they weren't respected, Chalila, because they didn't have a great relationship also, but in the case of Yitzchak and Rivka, it, in a certain way, prevented or forestalled the possibility of open dialogue. So Rivka never actually says to Yitzchak, what's going on with Esav? Yitzchak sees Esav, he's so good, he's so amazing, and we're going to give him brachas, and right? After the story with the soup, it's years later. Something's happening there. Rosalie, you had your hand up. Let me give you a chance too. Thanks for that, Helen. Rosalie, go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to say another Ish was Moshe. Ish meets three.
Good. Whether it's Ish and not Ha-Ish, but once you're on the subject of Moshe Rabbeinu, in Parshat Kitisa, after Moshe is not coming back on the timeline of the Jewish people down below, moments before they make the golden calf, they say, Kiseh Moshe Ha-Ish, Lo Yadanu Mehayalo. There's no modifier. It's Ha-Ish is the point, right? But Mi Ha-Ish. It's the man. That's so. But you could also say Ish meets three. There, it's a modifier. I don't know if it says Ha-Ish there at any point, but it's also at a well. Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so much for all that. Someone else with their hand up. I'm sorry. I hear someone else talking, but I don't know who it is. Can't see you. Anyone? No, I made that up. Okay. Thanks for that, Rosalie. And nice to see everybody on the call. Okay, screens on and screens off both. Here, Yitzchak Avinu is in a prayerful moment. Chazal tell us that, well, first of all, on the level of Pshat, which if you're holding an art scroll Chumash, this morning in Shul, I happened to open the art scroll Chumash, just curious what their translation was. So anyone have an art scroll Chumash? What does it say? It's a very nice translation, but it's an interpretation. Right? Art Scroll thinks, because that's what Rashi thinks, and that's what Chazal say in the Gemara. Translate, and Yitzchak went out to supplicate in the field, to supplicate. Rashi, Lasuach Lashon Tefila. So says the Medrash, so says the Gemara. Kamo Yishpoch Sicho in chapter 102. Tefila le'ani ki atov lifnei Hashem Yishpoch Sicho is the pouring out of one's speech, means of a supplicatory nature. A petitional prayer. So that's what Yitzchak was doing. Now, the pshat of what Lasuach Basadeh means, the translation of Lasuach seems to have not necessarily to do with speaking to God. It's just conversation. According to Ibn Ezra, he was walking between the sichim, between the different types of plants. And he just happened to be there at that time. Who was he with? Was he alone? Had he been there talking to other people? Different opinions. So according to Chazal, the Gemara, Rashi, Sephorna goes in this direction, Ramban goes in this direction. It's about prayer. Yeah. And he was going to daven. He had just been davening. It seems like he is davening, because it says he's coming from the well. And the Ramban says, where's that sadeh he's going to? He writes, he came from the Be'er. Maybe he meditated there, he spoke to Hashem there, but then he was going through Beersheva, where the well is, but also near it, outside of it, is the Eshel. Eshel Avram, the end of chapter 21, Avinu plants an orchard or a tamarisk tree or an orchard of trees or whatever it is he has there. It's on the way to where he lives. And he went out in the evening in order to speak in the field with his friends. There are other people there, and they're together. Rivka. They all went together. What? A wedding party, an entourage. And he brought it to the tent. In other words, an impromptu wedding, so to speak. The Kiddushin already happened. The betrothal happened. Eved Avram gave all these different jewels to her, etc. The jewelry, She took it, she wore it, she came, they met, and then they danced the chassan and kala to the yichud room. They went together to the bayis, to the house, which in that case was an ohel. One more moment, and then I'll take some questions, comments, see your hands. Hold on. So also, the Seforno just says, means natami naderech. He went off the road. He's offered lishpoch sichol ifnei basadeh shleif siku over drachim. He's not going to be walking on the way praying. He went off road. That's when it's basadeh, as opposed to on the derech. And he had come from Be'er Lachavri, where he'd already prayed. And he was answered before he could pray a second time. He went by Yitzchak. Yitzchak went out, meaning went off the road. Lasua basadeh lifnot arev. He was going to go pray a second time. He had prayed already. What was he praying for? He went to the well to pray for a shidduch, min hastam, and other things, but the shidduch too. And here he lifts up his eyes and he sees, behold, here are camels coming. And so before he could start his next tefillah, unlike what we saw before, and the Tziv says his hands were already up, he was already at prayer. Unlike Rashi, who says he's in the middle of davening, the Seforno says he's going off to pray a second time, and Terem Yikra'u V'ani Nebo. 4, they call out, and I will already answer, says Hashem. It says from Sefer Yeshaya. Before the prayer, the answer already came, which parallels what happened to who? The Eved Avram at the well. Remember? He's davening, and Terem Hila L'daber, before he finished speaking. So Sforno lines it up. Before he could even start speaking a second time, the prayer was answered in a, what's the word? In a hastened manner, but in a way that sort of short circuits, which should have been a continuation of the process of petition and the like. From here, Chazal learned, this is the Gemara in Masechet Brachot on, I think 26b, discusses that how do we know about the prayers, Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv? So Mincha corresponds to Yitzchak Avinu. Ayin Sham, the Gemara in Yuman, Daf Chaf, Chet Amud Bet, had a little discussion back and forth. Does that mean Avram didn't ever daven Mincha? And regardless, I think it was the Bali Tosfot there, and one of the Rishonim writes, Avram probably davened several times a day as well, but we ascribe it to Yitzchak. It's like attached to him. We associate the prayer more with him. Right here, leaf note arev, in the eventide. In the eventide, he goes out to pray. As it is the late afternoon, the sun is going to set, he's praying. What else happened in the late afternoon? Associated with the well, associated with prayer, and associated with great kindness. We just read it, beginning of chapter 24. Eved Avram comes to the well in the late afternoon. So in both cases, it's the evening time when these stories happen. Again, the parallels are there, and then the two parties meet and marry. But even if they remain separate on one level, on another level, there's a parallel here between the two stories of what's happening with both of them. Okay, I think Rosalie and then Shelley is the order I have it in on my screen here. Rosalie, go ahead, and then Shelley, please.
Okay. According to Rabbi Soloveitchik, it says, the Torah emphasizes Abraham's erect posture during prayer. And in Isaac's case, it's a prayer for the afflicted man when he swoons and he pours forth his supplications before God. Lasuach connotes the prayer of a broken man who cannot stand upright.
Wow. And Yitzchak, I guess, has his own life story already of things that have happened to him, traumatic experiences and the like. And he receives it differently maybe than the traumatic experiences of his father. Avram was thrown into a fiery kiln, but yet he was able to stand la'amod. It describes that he's standing before God. In the case of Yitzchak, interesting, lasuach, he's pouring out his brokenness. That's the pasuk I quoted before from chapter 102. Tefillah le'ani ki ya'atof, the prayer of the destitute or impoverished one, right? Who's
right,
up,
right.
And will pour out his
Exactly.
speech for God. It's beautiful. Thank you. That's amazing. Where's that Rav Soloveitchik in the Chumash?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful. That's great.
Yes.
That's really nice. Thank you. That's great. Beautiful.
Okay. Sure.
Shelley, anything?
Yes, I remember a couple of years ago when you were doing, on Monday, you were doing the Netziv as on the Parsha.
Yes, I don't remember doing it this Netziv, but on this Parsha, but maybe.
Yeah, well, it was, you emphasized how the Netziv thought it was so very, very important to have regular times and regular places for prayer.
Yes.
I got a lot of problems with that, especially with somebody that's supposed to be on such a high level as Yitzchak. So somebody that's on that kind of level is going to be always walking around thinking about God. He's going to see some beauty.
You cut out there, Shelley. I think you were going to, Shelley, try again. You were saying he's on such a high spiritual level that he is always going to be thinking about God and always praying. Was that the point? I'm not sure. We'll give you another half a minute.
I couldn't hear you because my internet connection comes fading in and
say again. You were up to the part about Yitzchak always being prayerful.
Yes, yes, he'd always be prayerful. And I mean, you walk outside and you see beautiful animals, you see beautiful plants. God is all around you, and he'd be remarking on that all the time. He wouldn't just, okay, well, let's see, this is the time when I've got to pray, and this is a place I've got to do it, and let's get it done with, and then I can go do whatever I want.
I agree with you, but that's not what the claim is here. In other words, what Chazal do is they say, where do we have the report of, on the level of Medrash, of prayer with Yitzchak? It's here. What time of day does it happen in? Isn't it uncanny that for Avram, it's always Vayashkem Avram Baboker? For Yitzchak, there is no Vayashkem Yitzchak Baboker. Didn't he wake up every day? Yeah, but it wasn't noteworthy. And it's Vayashkem Baboker, Vayamod. I don't want to misquote the pasuk from the beginning of Parshat Vayera, but the idea that he went to stand in the place where he would stand before. And this is a crucial point. I mean, I don't want to go too far into the Netziv's idea, because he had his own inner logic for it, which you're welcome to disagree with. But the Netziv's point was, religion cannot just be about a steady stream of inspiration. Else it's about my feelings and my emotions governing my relationship with God. As opposed to, Ana Avda Dekudesh Barichu, I'm a servant and a slave to the Almighty, which means I work for him, he doesn't work for me. And therefore, there are certain fixed times and fixed forms for how to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a higher way. Doesn't mean it's to the exclusion of seeing beautiful elements of nature and thanking God. I'm sure Yitzchak was that way, a very high spiritual, extremely high level. I don't have superlatives to describe his level of greatness. But at the same time, for the Netziv, there's this idea of routine or rhythm that is crucial to the religious life. I would like to imagine that Yitzchak Avinu, had both. The point here is Chazal mine the story for its halachic import and appreciate, look, we have davening 3 times a day. So there's 2 opinions there in the Gemara. Is it as against the order of offerings in the Mikdash? There was a Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim, etc. Or is it patterned after the Avot? And these are 2 different channels, if you will. They're not necessarily to the exclusion of the other, right? So the idea of like regimented tefillah is much more known to us from the world of korbanot, which is here's the recipe, here's what you do. And it's a big focus on the actions of sacrifice of an actual physical object, etc. The prayer of the Avot, although there were certainly mizbachot and there was, that's there, it exists, but the emphasis seems to be much more on their speaking to Hashem. And as Rosalie read us very beautifully from the words of Rav Soloveitchik, lasuach basadeh lifnot arev, in the evening, as the sun is, I imagine the sun setting, out, over the Jordanian hills. He looks out that direction. He sees the sun dipping beneath the mountain range, and he's davening to Hashem. And then in comes, right before the sun goes down, he sees Rivka Imenu, and that's the kesher between them. Anyway,
then why halachically don't we have to daven mincha right before the sun comes down when you can do it a lot earlier?
you could do it a lot earlier. So there's actually a discussion. That's the Gemara in Yuman Chavchet Amud Bet. It's talking about once there's a little bit of a shadow on the walls. That means, in other words, because the sun is already dipping in the west sky even a little bit, right? So that's a question. How much is it? It's any time in the afternoon, and how, like the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbayim, essentially could have been any time in the afternoon, but that also was actually later on. There's a discussion halachically. It's better to daven earlier, daven closer to the sunset. And there's debates on this issue. Yeah, discussions. I mean, the Gemara. Here, the two of them meet, and this sets the pattern. Vayisapera Eved Yitzchak, verse 66. Vayisapera Eved Yitzchak ate kol advar asher asa. Vayivya Yitzchak ha'ohel asara imo. Vayikachet Rivka vaytehilo leisha. Vayaveh vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Closing a circle. A lot to say about this last pasuk, but we're going to leave it for next week so we could do these last couple of psukim and the connection between with the Sari made a piece, which will then bring us into Avraham marrying this woman whose name is Keturah, his other children, his passing. Anyway, you have to come back next week for that because I have a meeting starting right now. I got to run to that one. Great to see everyone, and look forward to next Monday, God willing, bright and early, 9:15.